Janesville Mobilizing for Change. We've been working on a grant through the Office on Women's Health for the past 2 years to bring more information to Rock County about trauma and the effects on children and adverse childhood experiences. And Rock County has high rates of adverse childhood experiences compared with the rest of the state. And one of those adverse childhood experiences is growing up in a household where there's drug abuse occurring. So we've decided to bring more information to you through this event this evening about our Drug Endangered Children program in Rock County. This program started officially last year, and we've been working on cases, having different groups coordinating on these cases, like the Janesville Police Department and Child Protective Services and our court system, so that we can better serve these children and reduce the trauma that they're experiencing. So tonight we're bringing you Justin Stubendick from the Janesville Police Department, who's going to talk about the DEC program. We're also going to hear from Chad Woodman, who's going to talk about the DROP program, which is our opioid program through the Janesville Police Department. And we have Cammie Williams from the Rock County Child Protective Services, who's going to talk a little bit about that perspective on this issue. So we'll go ahead and get started with Justin.
Hi everybody, Justin. I work for JP. I've been working here in Janesville since 2011. Started out on patrol and kind of made my way through the patrol ranks, got some special assignments, and then got assigned to the street crimes unit in 2015. Drug Endangered Children, that kind of started for me when we ended up concluding a distribution of heroin case, and during the search warrant, we went in the house, and I gotta be careful I stay in my X here because I'm gonna start talking with my hands. So we go in the house, and mom and dad are fighting, and here's this 5-year-old in his one-piece jammies on the ground, holding his head like this. So that was kind of I didn't encounter kids in a patrol setting before, but then this was kind of one where I don't think I'll ever forget that image. So I started thinking about our cases differently. How, is it about making the arrest, or is it about intervening and trying to get these kids on a path to where they can thrive? So a short time later after that, I went to the Department of Criminal Investigations Drug School, and they talked about drug endangered children. I was like, man, I've never heard of that. And at that time, it was early 2016, I found out that Rock County was one of only a handful of counties in the state that didn't have this program. So we started working in 2016, and like Sherry said, just last year we officially got recognized by the Wisconsin Alliance and also the National Alliance for Drug Endangered Children. That being said, the program's doing well. This last year, Officer Woodman and I were invited to present a case we had at the national conference, and I was just telling them, at the beginning here, we got our evaluation back, and we only got 1 average rating, and there was 450 people there. So I think we're okay. So we're just above average. Not saying we're excellent, but we're above average based on that, our peers grading us. But anyway, so the program's going well. We do have a lot of things in place, and like Sherry said, you guys are going to hear from Officer Woodman tonight about our DROP program, which is a diversion program that's aimed at more the parent side of this issue, and then also I had my friends from Human Services to talk to you guys a little bit about the process that CPS goes through, because that was one of the learning experiences for me. On the front end, I used to go to these calls and I was like, boy, I don't understand how CPS does this. So I'd be like, one time they put the kid in foster, one time the kid goes with the parent, the next time, they don't do anything with the kid, or it seemed like to me. So when this program got going, reached out to them, and they've really dispelled a little bit of the urban legend of CPS as this group that comes in and just takes kids and they never go back to parents. I won't go too far into that, but you should know that the primary objective of Child Protective Services is to reunify families. And that's where we're taking this multidisciplinary approach and trauma-informed approach of getting the kids in an environment where they can thrive, getting the parents help through the DROP program, and then CPS facilitating both sides, bringing that family back together. So that's a long intro, but that's kind of the overview of it. And we're going to go through this here. Feel free to jump in anytime, ask any questions you might have. I'm pretty relaxed, as you can tell. And also, if you guys have any input or perspective, I'd love to hear it, because one thing I am is I'm always a student. I love to learn, and sometimes folks in the audience have a really good perspective to offer and can teach me a thing or two. So That being said, usually when I get this presentation, there's a couple videos in here that I have permission of the parents and the subjects in the video to use it. It kind of illustrates sort of what we're talking about here, drug endangered children, but also it gives you an idea of what you're looking for possibly, or the what we're seeing right now as far as drug use in this community. Because we can't really talk about drug endangered children if we don't touch on what we're seeing here in Janesville and across the nation, because it's really not that different, okay? So with that being said though, with the videos and stuff, I appreciate it. You guys are here to learn about this, and the people in the video, I don't think they want themselves put on YouTube. I have the permission to use it to share the message and kind of push us in the right direction. That's my little secret squirrel. I always think that's way cooler than anybody in the audience, but I like it. So, I mean, no, it's pretty cool. All right, so street crimes unit. Janesville's kind of unique as we have this unit. It's kind of a do-all unit, but really it's comprised of 7 people. We have our sergeant, who's Sergeant Mark Ratzloff. There's 6 officers like myself that are kind of assigned to the, it used to be much more focused on like the enforcement aspect, right? You go after the supply, and then we have Officer Woodman, who is assigned to the DROP program. So it's an acronym, just like everything in law enforcement or in the military or whatever any kind of government institution. And that DROP program, the acronym is death, recovery, or prison, because those are really the only 3 ways out of addiction. It started with Officer Foster, and then Officer Woodman's taken it, and he's taken it into a little bit different direction. Initially, when that program started, it was kind of Officer Foster's observation. He was a school resource officer working with the detective bureau in the summer, and he realized, like, hey, all these people that are doing retail thefts and burglaries, they're all drug addicted. So essentially, he would like go to the house, knock on the door, and be like, hey, this is who I am. I know you're addicted to drugs. Do you want help? They would kind of just slam the door in his face, because that was the relationship we had with people at that time. And then we would just sort of sit outside their house until they started to go through withdrawals, and then they would want help. It was about a dozen people initially, and Officer Woodman has helped that program grow into several hundred that have either we've had contact with, some have had higher degrees of success than others, but it's really hard with a program like that to measure. It's not very quantitative, it's very qualitative, and I'll let him talk about that a little bit more here towards the end. So that's how our street crimes unit is made up. Beloit, they have 1 officer assigned to work drugs, and that officer works on a federal task force with the FBI. And then Rock County has 3 deputies assigned to their special investigation unit. So all told, if you really think about it, there's about 11 dedicated officers or law enforcement officer personnel working on drug investigations in all of Rock County. So as I said before, our primary objective in that unit used to kind of be this one here, where we did narcotics investigations, and all these other things have kind of come along the way. What we realized was when we started looking at these street level investigations that a lot of times there are street gangs involved, there's human trafficking elements to it. We've kind of gotten away from the roadway personal interdiction because other things have sort of taken up more of our time, such as drug endangered children. But occasionally we're assigned to just kind of whatever other problem that we're facing, and if it's people, burglary patrol, whatever it might be. So we're kind of a, hey, you guys, go fix this problem for us, which we enjoy because it keeps us sharp. But really, what we've noticed is that these 3 things, along with drug endangered children, there's an element there. And the whole idea of the DEC program is to have that multidisciplinary approach, right? If you just let the narcotics guys think about just the drugs. CPS, the kids are their problem. The gang thing, the gang officers deal with, and human trafficking. Unfortunately, historically, that's kind of, in our area, that's been chalked up to, young females being promiscuous, something like that. That was the way it was viewed. So now that's all kind of changed because we notice, like, a lot of times when you have females or males, people going on dates, it's usually because they're drug addicted, right? And then they have kids that are in the system with CPS. So we decided that you can't look at all these things in their own little silo. They all need to come together. And that's sort of where the Drug Endangered Children program was our segue. So this is how the National Alliance defines a drug endangered child. And without reading the definition to you, It's a child who's living in an environment where drugs are used, manufactured, sold, and also to the extent where parents are abusing the substance, and it could be alcohol, we just call it drug endangered children, that they are unable to parent and create a safe environment. So, pretty simple when you think about it, and I started looking at that and I thought, boy, I think I know a lot of these kids. I just didn't know what, we didn't have a thing to call it before. And then also I thought back to, I'm born and raised in Janesville. I thought about, boy, my peers that I grew up with, now I'm encountering them as a law enforcement officer. And man, maybe they were dealing with some of these things in the past, So I'm getting smarter as I go, hopefully. I'm trying to learn. So, like I said before, we need to address the needs of these children, taking a trauma-informed approach, and putting them in a environment where they can thrive and work together. Part of what we've done here in Rock County is we've been pretty good about community education. I did this presentation a few years ago. Like I said, we did it on the national level, and we've done it for daycares, CPS, and some other groups. We sort of tailor it to what they're doing. Especially like teachers in daycare, because outside of the home, that's where they see these kids a lot, right? Also, we found that the earlier we can identify a drug endangered child, the better the success we have of breaking them out of that cycle. How many people have heard the expression, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, chip off the old block? Now that can be extremely positive, right? But it can also be, kid don't have a chance, so chip off the old block. And we need to change that idea, right? All these kids have a chance because we're going to give it to them, okay? And really, right there at the bottom, it's breaking the cycle. You hear me say that several times because I'm sure all of you can think of people you know in this community, because everybody from Janesville? Janesville is Janesville area. I like to say Janesville is like the biggest small town in the world. You run into people and they're like, what's your last name? Who's your dad? Who's your uncle? I think I know them. And then you're like, oh, everybody knows everybody, right? So you can probably think of people that you know, and obviously you have an interest in what we're talking about, that you thought, well, their parent might have had a problem with substance abuse, and their parent, and you look at this intergenerational cycle of drug abuse and criminality. And on a law enforcement perspective, both from a resource side and also from the side we don't want to keep seeing these same people over and over again, we got to start looking at it from what is the root cause instead of being reactive and treating the symptom, right? Because I don't think, and Officer Woodman can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've ever arrested anyone out of a drug addiction. Not sure that's ever happened where we're like, hey, go to jail. You'll get better after this. That's never really happened. So, and on the same front, we've never changed a kid's life by just kind of letting them sit in the juvenile system, not really ever seeing a consequence, and then when they turn 17, it's like, hey, you're an adult now. So wham, here's the hammer, Especially if they start using drugs young, and they start getting arrested and in the system for drug abuse, drug possession, that kind of thing. That's kind of that moment where they're, it's interesting because 17, they're an adult as far as prosecution, but they're a child as far as, a lot of other things are concerned. So they're kind of towing this line back and forth. And then, we found also putting people in the correction system there, it just puts them around other people who are committing crime, and they sort of, follow their group and they become a better criminal, so to speak. So some of the partners we work with, us law enforcement on top, Child Protective Services, healthcare providers have been big because a lot of times when we're talking about human trafficking, drug abuse, there can be sexual abuse, things like that. So a lot of SANE nurses have been really instrumental in our program as far as evaluating a child and the effects they might have from being exposed to drugs. Juvenile justice, like I was saying before, trying not to let these kids just sort of get pushed through the juvenile justice system without some kind of correction. And then, adult corrections there, and then also the schools. Schools have been big, Talking to SROs and assistant principals and stuff, there's always this group of kids, they say, that are hanging out in front of the school. They're not really troublemakers, they're not really doing that, but they're like, hey, you guys gotta go home. It's 4 o'clock, you gotta clear out. I'm not saying that's an indicator that there's something going on at home, but if that kid isn't necessarily like an academic superstar there for an extracurricular activity, but they don't want to go home, that might be an indicator of, there's something going on there. And I'm not saying it's drug abuse per se, but there might be some kind of trauma in that home. One of the stories you hear out of the National Alliance is a young kid, when he was being interviewed after the conclusion of a drug case, he told the law enforcement officer in that case that the worst part of his day was the walk home. So that's kind of one that's stuck with me as far as what I've learned from the National Alliance. So started looking at those kids kind of hanging around the school. Ways that we get these children brought to our attention is obviously on our side we run drug cases, right? So we're trained observers, so if we're running a drug case in a house and there's like a big wheel and a power wheel and a swing set and all this other stuff, we assume that the people selling drugs aren't out there on the seesaw. So, that's a clue to us, right? But also, it used to be just we would do our thing and then we would call CPS when it all came together. Well, now I can tell you if we're going to execute a search warrant, we're going to do it most likely when that child's in school, child's out at home, to reduce trauma that way, so I don't have to see another 5-year-old in his jammies put his hands over his head. Also, we're going to call CPS into the brief and say, hey, we have this case, it's come to a conclusion, do you want to come to the brief? Let you sit in a secure area. That way we can minimize, a lot of times as law enforcement officers, the only place we have to put a child that needs to be out of the environment we're searching, probably because there's drugs in there, is in a squad car. And most of the time they sit in the back, and that's not where they should be sitting. So with human services there, we can move that child right into their custody if that's what we need to do. They can go to a medical evaluation if that's necessary. A care house, everybody familiar with the care house? It's the YWCA has it. That's where kids who are the victim of sensitive crimes get interviewed. It's a very trauma-informed place. It's not like an interview room at a police department. So that's a really great resource we have in our community. And sure, you might know this. We're one of the only ones in this southern Wisconsin to have the care house, but the name escapes me. But they're trauma-informed places that kids can be interviewed forensically. Do you know what they're called? I'll remember it. I'll remember it here in like 5 slides, and I'll let you know. It's a really great resource we have through the YWCA in our community, and then also in the schools.
Child Advocacy Center.
Thank you. CACs, that's what they are. Thanks, Cammie. I should have asked you that. Then also in the schools, we have this program now where we're getting it going pretty smooth now. It's called Handle with Care. Anybody familiar with that? Besides Sherry. So really, again, looking at a trauma-informed approach, right, in our school district, pretty big school district in Janesville, I'd say. I feel like there's like 20 elementary schools, but I think I'm exaggerating the number that a little bit. But, so for instance, when I have my 5-year-old on the search warrant, and eventually when we find placement for him, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, he has to go to kindergarten the next day, whatever it might be. As you can imagine, if you get kept up till 2 in the morning and you just had the police come in your house or something like that, it might act a little different, right? So Handle with Care, basically what happens is the folks at the school, just who need to know, like the principal and counselor, are advised that there was a police incident at this child's house last night and they need to be handled with care. So no details about what it was, anything like that. Just that way, if that kiddo is having a rough day, puts her head down, isn't paying attention, we're not like, hey Billy, get your head up, and we further traumatize them by punishing them for something that's, kind of outside of their control. We just handle them with care. Now it's interesting, I gave this presentation one time, and a lady raised her hand and she was kind of fighting with me on this. And her argument with me was we should treat all kids with care, right? I'm like, yep, we do. And then also she was a little concerned about the privacy aspect of it, but I was trying to assure her that it's not like if you're in a school counselor, I don't give you the report and say, hey, guess what, here's everything. It's just the bare bones details. You don't need to worry about further traumatizing the child. It's just giving them a break because, if the police are coming into their home and this is the conclusion of a drug case, it's probably not the first time they've experienced trauma.
Do you have that throughout all the schools, every grade?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we're working on like P4Js. So part of it is smaller jurisdictions. They have like the 3 schools, right? You have like your elementary school, your one middle school, and then your high school or whatever they call it in some areas. So pretty easy to have this like real small circle and the information flows real well. Well, you know, we have all our elementary schools, we have 3 middle schools, we got our 2 high schools, and you know, a lot of times it seems like, as I'm thinking here, you know, it's some of those elementary kids, and none of our elementary schools have school resource officers. Some of the middle school officers are assigned to those schools, but I feel like we've had a lot of these like less than 10-year-old kids that are in these situations where they need to be handled with care. So it was a little bit of a challenge at first to figure out how that information was going to flow out, but we're still learning, but it's going pretty smooth. You know, all our officers are trained up. Right away they know when they have one of these incidents that handle with care notice needs to go out.
Do you guys consider volunteers or something like that, that you could be on call to have someone kind of maybe spend the first part of it, or however it might
So
work
you
out
know what
for the
happens
day
there
kind of thing.
is somebody goes, privacy issue.
Mhm.
So, you know, and like it's that whole thing, like, you know, we have a lot of in this this county, and it's a little bit to Sherry's credit and everybody else's. We have tons of people that want to help.
Yeah.
And then when I first started this, I was like, let's do drug endangered children, let's get it going. They're like, we need an MOU. I'm like, what is an MOU? I'm like, let's just do it, you know, because it's the right thing to do. So I've learned a little bit as we go. We gotta have all these agreements, and it helps people share information, but it's an excellent idea. We were thinking about it, and it's just kind of trying to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, because like if I was there, I mean, I wouldn't have to have details of, you know,
Mhm.
there is police contact or whatever, however you say to your principal or something like that, and then, you know, just someone there.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm looking at Sherry, and then I'm like, well, we can definitely start pushing that,
Yeah.
you know, and see if we can make something like that happen.
There were more than 50 handled with care referrals in Janesville just in elementary and middle school last school year.
Is it something that you would see possibly daycares being aware of?
So I've done some presentations for daycares, and that's part of like even the ones outside of P4J. Again, it comes down to the school district is kind of like the funnel, right? So it goes to like student services, then that information, so it goes from the police department to student services, and then it goes out to the principal of the appropriate school. Because we might have 6 different ones from 6 different schools. You know, and that way to make sure nothing gets missed, we're trying to funnel it here, and then it kind of goes out, kind of like this hourglass. It comes in, it's in the middle.
For those that are under age 4 though,
That's
that's
what
what
we're-
we're thinking of.
Yes, not yet.
Okay.
We're trying to get that because
Something
it's something outside of that school district. And the school district has been kind of the way that information disseminates, but we've been working on that. And it's gonna be one of those things again, like it sounds super easy, like I can just call up and say, hey, Susie, this is what happened last night. But again, it's the whole, we gotta have an MOU, we gotta have an agreement that we're not gonna share this information, and then if you do, you get in trouble. So there's a lot of, it's a great thing, but sometimes it's hard to get going, so. Any other questions about handle with care? All right, so those are all the things we're doing, and now we're gonna hit on kind of what we're seeing in drug trends, and then I'll give you some examples of some cases, and then we'll start talking about, other than getting kids removed from these environments, how we're working on getting everybody back into a healthy environment. So all the pictures you're gonna see in here, except for one, are from actual drug cases we've run in the last 2 or 3 years. So that way, it's like I said, it's like the real thing coming from the community. So this is the one picture that's not one of our pictures. But you guys have probably heard of fentanyl in the news, right? So when I first put this together, fentanyl is just kind of coming into the area, and now I can tell you, I think I can safely say that all of our fatal overdoses this year have had at least one form of synthetic fentanyl, right? So not even the this little fentanyl you're seeing here. We're talking into these where, to give you reference, that's like a grain of salt. So that's a fatal dose of carfentanil, acetylfentanyl, acrylfentanyl. There's another one it's like a W something. That's 15,000 times more powerful than your standard fentanyl. And then over there on the left, you'll see that used to be kind of like the fatal dose of heroin. But that, again, that all depends on how tolerance and things like that of people. So up here, you can see I said traditional heroin's on its way out. I can tell you that the street crimes unit hasn't bought traditional heroin in probably 2 years through our controlled buy operations. We're just not seeing it anymore in our area. So part of the problem is a lot of it's coming in through the mail from China, and it's kind of like this race to make the most potent form, right? And also what we're seeing is, and I'll show you a video here at the end, we're seeing fentanyl make its way into other drugs. Okay, they're throwing fentanyl into things because it creates that very strong addiction, physiological need. So this is what more like of a tradition. Okay, first of all, I was asked. So being a cop, I was like, I don't really have a lot of experience with drugs, so I was like really learning. And I always try to catch people, but anybody in here got a lot of experience with drugs?
Have a lot.
Yeah. Personally or like on a third
Both.
thing? Okay. So like this is what, this is more just to kind of give you an idea of what's in the area and also like what to look for, I guess, when you're looking for these kids, right? Or maybe look for if you had kids that you think. So anyway, it's just good information. So this is kind of like traditional heroin. It kind of comes in this chunk, a little more solid. It's usually gray, purple, sometimes brown. What we saw most recently when we were getting a lot of heroin was this dark gray color, okay? Comes packaged like that in the corner of a sandwich bag. That's usually how you see drugs being distributed. Lately though, it seems like more and more we have people distributing narcotics and they're just like handing it to the person buying it. So they're not even packaging it, which is kind of dangerous. So these powders, this was kind of like the early example we saw of what we suspected was fentanyl-laced heroin. We saw a lot of morphine with fentanyl. But anything you see like that's an opioid or opiate in a powder, it's probably some derivative of fentanyl. White powder right now is kind of all we're seeing. And now we've arrested people distributing, saying that like, oh yeah, man, it's super dangerous, because I would like glove up, mask up, whatever when I was packing it up. So it's not a secret to the people that are selling this. So obviously paraphernalia is not good for kids. This is a house that was kind of like a flop house here in town. And I can tell you every room in the house looked like that. Things you'll see that you don't have a lot of experience with, like either someone you know or exposure to narcotics. All these they look like little candle type holders. Those are all cookers. Those are, the reason you see so many of them and so many needles is they just go to the needle exchange, and they're trying to keep clean needles, and that's what's given out. So they give out a whole kit at the needle exchange in an effort to, try to curb like the spreading disease and things like that. The only problem we've seen with it, or drawback, I guess, is like they're supposed to bring them back, but usually they just end up on a mattress, right? So you get like 100 of these things. So every room in this house was like that. There were kids in this environment. They didn't live there full time, but when we went in there, we took like 3,000 needles out of that house, and we just kind of stopped counting. So because it was a big operation, just cleaning it up. So paraphernalia is dangerous, obviously. You can see down like this needle here, it's kind of pulled back a little bit. So obviously if a kid gets into that, especially if they're smaller, being as potent as fentanyl is, they can easily overdose on that. Not to mention they could get, if you do have someone who's has a disease, the kid can be exposed to that disease. So kind of goes without much more elaboration that opioid paraphernalia, not good for kids, puts them at risk. As of late, we've seen a real resurgence of crack and cocaine in our area. It really seems like, from our perspective, that we don't really have that many people selling opioids in Janesville right now. We have a lot of people selling crack and cocaine. But what we have been seeing is this speedball here where we've had crack cocaine, which is a stimulant, mixed with opioid, which is a depressant, and we've had people overdosing, they're getting Narcan, and then they come back from it, and they're just like bouncing off the walls. Because they either thought they were getting cocaine, and they got some fentanyl in there and overdosed, or they were thinking they were getting opioids, and then they got some crack and cocaine in there. So it's been this real, and you can imagine obviously going back and forth like this, it can become very dangerous. Not only to the user, but also if you have a parent who is using both of these drugs, they get, I've had kids tell me that their parents are in their sleepy mood when they're using an opioid, but if they're on a stimulant like crack or cocaine and the kid, how many people get mad at their kids? I get mad at my kids, right? So now if I'm on a stimulant, right, the shoe on the floor might be enough to set me off into some physical abuse. You know what I mean? Or puts someone over the level of discipline into that physical abuse, right? So that's kind of one of the unseen effects of crack and cocaine use. We kind of say sometimes that we don't see anybody like overdosing on this, but it's not a definite anymore with all these drugs mixing. And so in May of 2018, you can see the New York City Health Department issued a warning about fentanyl-laced crack cocaine. We've had that here now. We've also had several cases where we have kids in high school that are using cocaine. So it's not just this, this thing that's like an adult drug anymore. Those kind of drugs are making their way down to teens. So that's an example of crack there. Crack is going to be more in a solid form. Cocaine is going to be powder. You can see it's packaged the same way in the corner of a sandwich bag. That's also something if you're in one of these houses where maybe you suspect the distribution or use. In a house where it's being distributed, you're going to see a bunch of sandwich bags missing the corners because nobody's putting sandwiches in them. And in a house where you use, you're going to see a bunch of those baggy corners untied. So that's kind of how you delineate between someone who's selling, someone who's using. So as far as like pills and ecstasy and MDMA, we've seen it, but it's not super popular here. The stimulant around here that seems to be the choice is crack or cocaine. However, the prescription pills like Xanax, lorazepam, all the prescription benzodiazepines, you see those going around quite a bit, especially like neuropathic pain medication also. A lot of that has to do with when people are in the throes of drug addiction and they're going through withdrawal, they'll just take whatever they can get to try to like counteract those physical symptoms, okay? But right now in high school too, the Xanax is kind of the thing. You hear people talking about the Xanny bars all the time. So they'll crush them up and snort them. Problem there is we have people that get really cheap synthetic fentanyl. They press it, make it look like a Xanny bar. If somebody's like, it was like one Xanny bar, and then they just overdose, and it's like 5-6 shots of Narcan to bring them back, if they get brought back. So that's another thing that's complicating things in our community is people are taking these synthetics and pressing them into pills, to make them look like something else because then they can sell them for a little bit more. So these were some pills. There'll be a little more backstory on these on one of the case studies, but had a mom taking her kid's prescription pills, talking to her boyfriend on the jail phone, and pressing them, making like something that mimicked MDMA. So it actually tested positive for MDMA on our field test. So there again, it was like, hey, just buy this pill press off the internet, take this, this, and this, press this pill, and you can sell them for $20. So using their kids' ADHD medications and whatever else. So THC, I don't spend a lot of time on this. It's going to be legal in Illinois pretty soon. The one thing we have seen here is the vaping, the dabs, and like the preloaded cartridges, which I have some pictures of those. That's been the thing we're seeing now. I don't see a lot of like the green leafy substance that has a really pungent odor. That's still around, but it's kind of like I want to say like more of an adult use of THC. The vaping and juuling, and that's really been in the news lately because it's not only the nicotine that they vape or juul, there's THC now. In fact, I'll talk about this, but we just seized a bunch of them the other night. The other problem we see with this is now that people can get like $20,000 worth of THC through the mail, it's become like most of our shootings in the last couple of years have been over weed or THC because there's so much money in it. You know, like you always hear everybody say, "Is that your dad's ditch weed?" That was about 7% THC. 2 nights ago, we seized these preloaded cartridges here on a traffic stop, along with some more of the traditional THC. You can see, kind of see over here, this says 72.1% THC. So you're going from 7% to 70%. And 2 nights ago, I saw one that said it was 92%. So, and if you don't know, THC is actually considered a hallucinogen because that Delta 9 ingredient is the thing that used to make you feel like make people feel good, and they like made them hungry and they wanted Cheetos and things. But that was at 7% concentration. At 90% concentration, we've actually had people have like really bad trips on it because they'll take that preloaded cartridge, like vape the whole thing. You can also like just Google like THC overdose, and you'll see all kinds of stuff out of Colorado and these places that it's illegal because people are like, sweet, we're going to Colorado. They'll like eat all the edibles and they basically overdose on THC and they start freaking out because it's a hallucinogen. So whatever your stance is on it, the secondary and tertiary problems with it are just like alcohol, the abuse, you know. So I think that's what we're going to see with that. But really, these cartridges are about $40 a piece, and you can get, you know, it's like a pen. So you can get, you can only imagine how many of those you can get the flat rate box through the Postal Service. You know.
Did any of those from Racine make it to Rock County? The refills of that company, quote unquote, that just was, they were arrested in Racine?
I don't know about them specifically. The ones we've been seeing a lot are from Vegas. They just ship them in from Las Vegas. In fact, the other ones that we seized 2 nights ago, you like Google it, and it says THC on steroids. That's like their website. So, I mean, that's where it's going, you know. So, and you know, if you get, imagine you get 10 of those, you know, that's some money. So.
That's only a chemical, isn't it?
What's
Is
that?
it the chemicals?
So what they do is they get the concentrate. It used to be called dabs. It was kind of like a wax. So what they do is they cook it out, right? They cook out the actual oil. That is the concentrate out of the plant. So what they do is so all the like twigs and stems and stuff that people used to just like throw away, well now they put them in. What's also dangerous about it, that's a really good point that you reminded me of, is in order to do that, it's basically kind of like a meth lab. So they take everything and like butane and charcoal, the Coleman fuel for the little grills. Yep, and they're in like, actually right across the street here, we did a search warrant. And there was like 50 of those things in there, and this guy was cooking the oil out. And again, Google like, it'll be called like a dabs lab. You'll see like they explode all the time too. It's not just meth. So it's just, you know, we got flame, fuel, and then people trying to get every little bit out of there, and then like, you know, it'd be like you trying to like grill, but like having an additional propane torch like open next to it. You know, it's very dangerous. That's kind of the, like if your neighbor and you live in an apartment is doing it, it can be a bad day for you too. So, and you know, the hard part to detect about the cartridges or the oil is when they vape it, it's really kind of like odorless because it's so hot, you know, it vaporizes. So you don't get the like traditional thing in law enforcement where people would like roll the windows down and you're like, whoa. I mean, you can like smell it all the way down Milton Avenue, right? So, and that's how kids, you know, we've had kids saying that they're vaping right in school. You know, they just go like, hey, you can vape here because there's a void in the cameras. So our SROs, they're pretty good about knowing where most of those are, but you know, it's pretty easy to do just in school undetected. So meth. We're pretty lucky with meth. We've only had like a couple cases. The cases are the shake and bake method, which is essentially where people go, and the reason you can't buy like a bunch of allergy medicine is because the pseudoephedrine in there is like one molecule off from meth. So what they do there is, again, they combine all these chemicals into like a 2-liter bottle is the most common we see. It starts this chemical reaction, they throw some batteries in there, ammonia, and it changes it molecularly into a powder that is meth, not pseudoephedrine anymore. What's really dangerous is like, if it encounters water, it like combusts and lights on fire. So a lot of these people like, they call it burping so it doesn't explode, but then also they like pour the byproduct in the toilet and then like the water lights on fire. The biggest one we've had was right down by the courthouse, and there was about 351 pots. And also when we were debriefing them, they were like, oh yeah, man, he was like burping that thing in my face and like burned my eyebrows off. And they were like lighting, the toilet was all like scorched from them pouring the stuff in there. And the worst part was they took all the 1 pots and like threw them in the crawl space above their neighbor's apartment. So when you see the DEA guys come in and they look like, you know, like nuke suits, it's extremely dangerous. You know, the byproduct, that's the kind of, everybody knows that. But the interesting thing is like up north, all they see is the meth and there's not a lot of heroin. We're so close to Chicago. Like our street prices are slightly more, maybe like $10 more than Chicago. And we actually have people that, like when we go to do controlled buys, they say, oh, well, my guy's going to Chicago. He'll be back in like an hour and a half. So it's straight from Chicago. But on either side of us here in like Walworth and Greene County, they have a lot of these actually. And the people down by the courthouse that you were saying, you remember, they were from Walworth County. They just like moved here. And they were like the only show in town at that point. So really that's a good thing for us, but it does pop its head up here or there. These are some of the things like, without getting into do an hour-long presentation on this, but these people that make meth, they're like, you know, like basically, and they take their chemistry set made out of that, and they produce meth. The only other meth I've encountered around here was this here. This is crystal meth. And I came into possession of this. A guy had called, he lived right over by Franklin Middle School, and he's like, hey, I think there's some drugs in my yard. And I'm like, okay. So I go out there and he's like, hey, I found this. It was like around spring. So like snowbank melting or whatever. And I'm pretty sure this guy wasn't like using meth. He like had all his teeth. Totally wasn't freaking out or anything, but he was like, I don't want to touch it. So anyway, I picked this up and I'm like, man, it really does look like meth, right? Take it back, and sure enough, it was like almost 4 grams of crystal meth. So it is here. My suspicion is probably like this person got stopped on a traffic stop and was like out the window into a snowbank. You know, like maybe the officer looked down, whatever. Because I mean, that's probably like $500 worth of meth. So you wouldn't just throw $500 out the window unless it was that. So it's around, but it's pretty elusive. So it's kind of a good problem to have for us that we can't buy meth. So. All right, so all of those drugs, right? Anybody familiar with adverse childhood experiences, ACEs? All those things, it's probably no surprise then that if you have adverse childhood experiences, a lot of big correlation between those and substance abuse, right? Like self-medicating, people are like dealing with their demons. I have a lot of veteran friends that, you know, sometimes abuse some kind of substance. I can tell you here in Rock County in Wisconsin, we've been really looking at these, right? Again, this could be a really long presentation in and of itself, but all of these things are on the ACE exam, and there's 10 questions, right, Sherry? 10 questions, and you go through and you mark like yes or no, right? And then you tally up. So in short, if you have 4 or more, you're considered pretty traumatized, right? You heard Sherry talking about earlier that people have pretty high ACE scores here. Yeah, they're pretty high, like highest in the state in Rock County. So we have the highest in the state. Actually, I just heard a stat recently where somebody's trying to like fight us for #1, but I'll go with this. But you know, Rock County, we have the highest population, 24%, with more than 4 yeses on this test, right? Which is considered pretty traumatized. Couple that with, we also have the smallest percentage with 0. So part of that is I feel like we do a really good job of like going, hey, why is this happening? And we're looking into it. You know, that combined with this Journal Sentinel article, you'll hear me refer to this a couple times. They wrote this article about, like, you would think like Rock County is the worst place in the world to live, right? GM closed, Beloit doesn't have any work. It's a real bad place, right? A raging heroin and opioid epidemic, right? So again, the correlation between ACEs and substance abuse. That being said, programs like DROP, Drug Endangered Children, those are all things we're doing about it, right? A lot of things. You guys have probably seen a ton from Janesville Mobilizing for Change. Rock for Recovery is coming up. So we're doing a really good job of recognizing that this is in our community and making strides to make it better. A couple years ago at our Hope Over Heroin event, I went for Officer Woodman. I showed up. I didn't actually know I was talking. Then I had to talk. But I said something that it occurred to me, but it's kind of really struck me since, that looking at kids, right, we've been really focused on, like, we got to help people who are drug addicted, help people that are drug addicted. Well, now we have this whole, like, group and generation of kids that they've, like, had a parent who's overdosed, family member who's overdosed, lost a parent to a fatal overdose. And I think back growing up, I maybe knew like 1 or 2 kids that I was like, man, something really bad happened to them and their family. So it's this problem that's really rearing its head now in our foster system. Human Services is really overworked and understaffed. It's really becoming a problem for us. So this drug endangered children and things like that are how we're responding. So as I said before, this is Sherry's moment here. There's a direct link between it, right? And Officer Woodman's done some really good things in DROP, having people take ACE tests. And we find out that, hey, you know what? We have people who are parents, but they were drug endangered children when they were a kid. So we have drug endangered children raising drug endangered children. It's that cycle. One example I can really think of here is this one, and this didn't occur to me until this happened. I ran this case on this girl, Kate. I'm at Hope Over Heroin talking, and I see her like sitting out there looking at me, right? And I'm like, oh man, this is gonna go like 1 of 2 ways, right? So the presentation's over, the guy from the Journal Sentinel comes up to talk to me, and she's kind of standing here, and I'm talking with the reporter, and she's like, hey, do you remember me? I said, yeah, I remember you, and she gives me this big hug, right? And the reporter's like, how do you guys know each other? And she's like, well, he arrested me. He's like, for what? And she's like, selling heroin. So it's like, okay. Then he was like, what? He's from Milwaukee, so like, he's like, what, this cop and this person who's, in recovery. Anyway, she looked back and, here she said that, you know what, her parents, substance abuse, and then she'd been using drugs for almost 20 years, right, as a method for her to deal with those problems in the home, the trauma. I can tell you now, she just had a baby. She's doing good. So she was one of the DROP clients. So with all that being said, what do we look for a drug endangered child? Well, physical symptoms, what I think of classic as a patrol officer, I always got the call where like the kid had a bruise, or like the kid came to school and the teacher patted him on the back and they're like, oh, and that's the classic physical abuse that we get calls for, and I would call CPS about it. Hardly ever did I get somebody call and say, hey, you know what, like, the kid next door, they're always sick, they're never clean, they don't have a coat, they got like bug bites, all these things I have here. And they never said, you know what, I think the parents are abusing drugs or they're not taking care of their kid. I never really got that call, right? So those are things we can look for that I'm not saying they mean that child's drug endangered. But again, you got to take all these things, and it's kind of like, I always describe a drug endangered child as that kid that you know something is up, but you just don't know what it is. You take those physical symptoms and look for the behavioral symptoms, and they can be all across the board, I can tell you. I've had kids that, they're on the spectrum for autism to an extremely high degree, and then when we finally come in there and intervene, that kid's almost nonverbal at 7 or 8 years old because mom says, oh, he stays up all night and plays the Xbox, and then I just give him Benadryl and he sleeps all day, right? So that kid is not thriving. And I'm like, where's he? Oh, he's in the virtual academy. There's not a computer in the house, okay? So the lack of interpersonal skills, but also you have kids that are hyper-vigilant, right? Because they don't know who's coming and going from their house. Now on the flip side, I've had kids where the 5-year-old that I was telling you about that covered his ears, at the end of the night, he was like, can you guys sleep over? We can watch movies. I love you guys. Didn't ask about mom and dad one time after he got over the initial shock of us coming into his home. To complicate that situation even more, you want to talk about anxiety, depression, things like that. When this kid's grandmother came, he started freaking out because mom had told him that she was dead. So he thought she was some kind of ghost or something. So fast forward though, now grandma has really fought for that kid, and he's doing well now. So he's kind of one of the ones that he started it for me, and now he's in a good place. But attention-seeking behaviors. That could be kids calling out for that, like hanging out at school, right? It might just be asking for someone or waiting for someone to ask, not necessarily like, hey, I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. Like, hey, what's going on? You're here every day, Or if you see kids hanging around places like that. And the one thing that's always gotten me is the kids that are like totally attached to you, that don't ask for their parents, right? How many of you encountered a kid like that where they're like, holy cow, you're giving me attention, and they're just all over you? Like my kids, they're not gonna just like roll up to a stranger and like hug their leg and whatever else. So that's always been the one to me it seems off, and it's a good behavior for them because they're getting attention, but also it's like, hey, why aren't they concerned about their parent, the person that's supposed to take care of them? Again, putting one or two of these with one or two other things, that's where we start to look at identifying these kids. And I don't think I mentioned it before, but we're not labeling these kids as drug endangered children, we're identifying them, right? Identifying that they have needs and we need to serve those needs. So this video here, it's one of these things that I'm like, what does a drug endangered child look like? This is a 1-year-old, and his mom had called and said, hey, I think it was kind of a custody thing. And she was like, hey, I think he got into something at his dad's. Dad uses THC, he has edibles, all these things, right? So I'll just let you watch the video. And I think what it says here is the other thing about kids is they don't really lie. You know what I mean? They're not putting on a show. They're just giving you what's there, right? And so this kid, he's 1. He can't act like he's doing anything. It just is what it is. So a physical symptom, obviously he's got dry mouth, right? It's kind of hard to see on here, but his pupils are pretty blown out. You guys see how long it took for him to respond when mom just gave him a kiss there at the end? You watch that again. His lack of sensory response is pretty significant. So this is one of those where I get it a little bit where people are like, well, it's just the parents smoking weed. But I can't tell you how many times we've gone into the freezer when we're searching, and here are the gummies, the edibles, right next to the ice cream bars or the waffles, right? So it's one of those things I don't believe that those parents are like, you know what, I'm gonna put these here so the kids get into them. But the problem is just like everyone, we get a little too comfortable. And a lot of things we do, we leave things in the place where you don't think a kid's gonna eat some gummy bears? Come on, gummy bears, right? So that one there for me is boy, there's that kid. Now I can tell you that child did where the medical exam comes in. His mom took him for a medical exam. He had a pretty significant amount of THC in his blood, also in hair follicle testing. And mom got tested also because she was a potential, dad was like, nope, it's her. Hair follicle testing can go back 90 days, so they just take a bit of hair from a kid and then they can test it. That kid had exposure, like secondary exposure to THC, back at least 60 days. So it wasn't just this one time, he had kind of gotten into some things. So it's not just a little bit hard to watch, kind of hits me every time, but it's a good example of like, hey, it's just weed, that would never happen. Well, of course, no one ever intends for their kid to be, you know, in danger. It just sort of happens because of the environment, right? I can't tell you how many times I've come across someone who's drug addicted and they're like, Justin, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, they might have just overdosed. I want to be clean. I introduce them to Officer Woodman, and I'm looking at them, and I know they do not want to be there. All right, I believe them 100%. They say they love their kids. I know they love their kids. I can see it, right? It's been my experience that people lost in drug addiction kind of lose control of everything. And one thing they hang on to sometimes is being a parent, you know, and they're resistant to work with CPS because they don't want to lose that control and they want their kids. That's that thing they're hanging on to. Where it comes in for us is we've had really good success explaining that, I know you love your kids, I know you're a good parent, but you're about 25% of yourself right now, you know, and that's where things like DROP and some of the services CPS can offer come in, and also human services putting that kid in an environment where they're safe, so that parent doesn't have to worry about who's taking care of their kid. Are they getting food? Are they getting to school? It's really a time for the parent to work on themselves and work towards that reunification. So this is kind of a couple years old now, but some of the newer stats aren't out yet. But really across the nation, overdoses are up, you know. 2016, 63, that's like wiping Janesville off the map from illegal drug overdoses. I can tell you Janesville is right on the national average. The real interesting stat out here, and we're getting better about this now, is like we don't really know how many kids are associated with these because we weren't really looking for that before, right? A traditional law enforcement response was like, hey, you have somebody that can take this kid? Cool, we're gonna call them. You got the kid, you're gonna take responsibility? See you later, right? And then later CPS is like, hey, why did you give that kid to them? We're like, well, that's your problem. So that's like the old way of thinking, right? Now we're trying to put that kid in an environment where they can thrive. So you can see that number jumped to 70,000 in 2017, so 10% going up. 2018, CDC still hasn't put out their stat. But you can just see here on the graph, since 1999, you know, it's gone up at a staggering rate. What's interesting about these two is these are all different drugs that are fatal. So you can see it's not just the opioids. You know, there have been people that have overdosed on cocaine or have died as a result of drug overdose. Again, just a graph showing that we're on the rise here in the last 20 years at a pretty good rate. So in Janesville, in 2017, these are kind of some stats here. The one that is most striking to me is, at that time I was just looking at how many kids were related to our overdoses, right? And at this time, this is where Narcan became very available. And we would come across people that overdosed, and they're like, oh, I've overdosed like 10 times. You know, they weren't like, this is the one time. They're like, this is just the one time nobody got me, right? At that time, there were 35 kids from these 57 that were either in the home or present for the overdose. And 7 kids had lost a parent in 2017. So that's where it really hits for me, and I was saying, you know, we could have this like whole support group of kids in the Janesville School District that have all had this one thing in common, and it's a terrible thing, you know, it's a parent who is overdosed on drugs. So a couple quick case studies, and then I'll introduce Chad and then Cammie and Beth. This is one, a classmate of mine. Somebody said, hey, this person's using heroin. I said, oh man, I went to school with her. So I went down there and I was like, hey, remember me? What you been up to? I know what you've been up to. Offered services through Officer Woodman. Also, this one, this female, she was kind of doing an online dating thing to support her habit. And I was like, hey, I've seen your ads too. Let's get you some help, right? So she was pretty good about it at first. And then like a lot of things, she kind of just fell off on it. So even after like confronting her and saying, hey, I know what's up, I was still able to run a drug case on her. And this was one during the whole case, it sort of became this like onion that I kept peeling back layers. So she was sort of middling these heroin deals, but then also like a couple times when our informant went in to buy, she'd be like hosting these parties where her and all her friends were smoking weed, using some other drugs. And then I come to find out that at the time she was like 35. She had this 21-year-old boyfriend who just got out of prison for being a felon in possession and selling drugs. Look a little further, Beloit arrests them in possession of a handgun. I look and like right on the video over in Walworth County, I have her like, this guy like looking at a gun, him handing her money, and she buys the gun for him. So she's really got herself in this like web of bad things. So we execute a search warrant, take her into custody, again, push her toward the services. But we start debriefing the daughter, who's 15, and she's talking about how this guy was giving her the weed. He understands me better. He's closer to my age. Like, we go for walks. He takes me to get my nails done. All these things that on like the human trafficking, radar start pinging it pretty hard, right? I go back to mom and I'm like, hey, did you ever consider this? And mom's like, absolutely not. I was sexually abused. I know if that would be happening. I'm like, okay. So, fast forward, she gets into some of these services and like she gets sentenced finally. She got 2 years of probation. If she completes her probation without getting revocated or breaking her rules, it shouldn't get the felonies deferred. The daughter, she's doing a little better. Got her hooked up with Big Brothers Big Sisters for a while. I'm trying to build some of those life skills, that don't rely on like partying and things like that. She's doing okay. 15 at the time, she's a tough one, because she's been doing all these things and not really had a lot of rules. And so it's like, hey, you need to go to bed by 10 o'clock and do your homework. And it's like, well, no, I don't, because my mom never makes me do that. Right? So there's a little bit of resistance there. So that's where like that maybe a little bit earlier detection, we might be able to like start changing the behavior sooner. So it's not this like, hey, I do what I want, and now I'm gonna make mistakes and it's gonna come back around on me. So occasionally, even from a couple years ago, mom will still call me, daughter will still reach out, and so it's kind of this ongoing thing. And I'll let Officer Woodman talk about drop more, but I don't know. I don't know how you gauge a victory there. Is it good because we intervened and we still have contact? It's not like they ran and hid forever. They still reach out for help once in a while, but it's the cycle of addiction. Sometimes it's a roller coaster. So I think it's a pretty good outcome. This one, I thought I was just going to go to court on this and I could update it, but this one's a little more straightforward. Probation calls me up and says, hey, this guy's living in his house with these 4 kids, and somebody called us and said he's selling drugs. Like, we're going to do a home search. So we go over there, we do a home search. Sure enough, a bunch of drugs in the house. There's 1 little kid there, 3 of them are in school. So all the pieces came together well on this because probation notified us. I immediately called CPS, right? So CPS was there on scene, did their evaluation. We notified the school because mom and dad were going to be in custody. That way, the school resource officer discreetly got those kids out of class, so that way they weren't standing outside looking for their parents or, making it more traumatic than it needed to be. Also in this one, the city code enforcement side, it was interesting because I got consent to search the house, and I'm like trying to open all the cupboards and they're all like screwed shut. I'm like, what's in there? And she's like, oh, I don't open those. I'm like, why? She's like, they're raccoons. They're breaking through the top of the cupboard from the attic. So in this instance, the landlord, so I call the landlord, right, and I'm like, hey man, there's raccoons in the cabinets. And he's like, well, that's their problem. I'm like, no, it's your problem, it's your property. Like, so I get city code enforcement in, and I'm debriefing the mother of the children, my girlfriend mother, and she's like, oh yeah, he told me if I called on him, he would tell you guys I was selling drugs. So I'm like, oh, okay. So she's like, yeah, and then he would like, it's basically this little barter system, right? So like, this landlord was holding this over them almost like extortion, but at any rate, I digress. So she really felt like she didn't have a direction to go. So the suspect in this one, he got his parole revocated after like 6 months. He's been sitting in prison ever since. We were going to go to trial on this on Monday, but got pushed back again. The other thing on this one was as we were searching, all the individually packaged little baggy corners of crack and cocaine were stuffed in his jeans pocket, which was like laying on the floor next to the pack and play thing in the bedroom. So another thing that we used to do in law enforcement that we do different now is we might have said that like that was in the bedroom, but now when I send Cammie a report, I'm like, the jeans were on the floor, this was the size of the jeans, it roughly matches this person, it was easily accessible to all kids in the house. You know, we're painting a little bit better picture of why this is dangerous, because it's my fear that what's happened a lot is this is like, well, it could have been dangerous, right? And we see a lot of child neglect charges go by the wayside until it's like, oh, the kid got into it and they died. Dude, now it's totally dangerous. And it's like, well, no, we need to be a little more preventative, right? Like, and that's where CPS comes in sometimes, where the enforcement side falls a little short, because that child neglect charge is a misdemeanor most of the time. And that sort of just gets pushed aside, and then they charge all the other charges. So we're working a little better about putting value on the kids, which has always been my argument. By throwing out the neglect, you're pretty much saying that you have no value, we value the drug charges more, which is kind of backwards in my opinion. Last one here, as far as case studies, this one, when I was on patrol, this juvenile female, she called me from the Italian house and says, hey, my parents won't let me come home. Okay, so I go over there and I'm like, hey, what's up? She's like, well, hey, I'm having feminine problems. I want to go home. I don't feel good, but I tried to go home. My mom says I can't go home. She doesn't care where I go. I'm like, well, why can't you go home? She goes, well, my mom and her boyfriend are cooking pills. I was like, oh, okay. So at this point, I'm like, well, tell me all about that. And she basically gives me like a 3-year street cop, a pretty good course on all about cooking pills. I was smarter when we were done with it. So we go back to the house, and sure enough, exactly what she says is happening. The 2 younger sisters are there, and CPS becomes involved, and all 3 of the kids are placed with foster, right? As we're talking a little bit, I'm building this rapport with her, and she tells me, and mom tells me that her biological dad had overdosed on drugs, right? So I'm like, oh man, it's pretty rough, right? So a couple days later, so I think, cool, man, we got these kids out here, this is great. A couple days later, if you recall, I said she's 15 at the time, 15, 16. I get a call about like a out of control teenager. I go to the foster house, and here's this girl, right? They're like, hey, you need to go to bed by 10. She's like, no, I don't. You know, I do what I want. My mom doesn't, you know what I mean? So she's really resistant to it, right? So we get her calmed down, and you know, kind of some time passes by. I get reassigned to the street crimes unit. Now it's 2016, and I respond to an overdose on West Court Street. Pull up, and a couple of my partners are doing CPR on this female. There's another female standing there and a male. And they're like, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead. And I'm like, what did she take? And they're like, it's morphine. This is right around the time when we saw white powders coming onto the scene, fentanyl, stuff like that. So paramedics come, they give her 4 or 5 shots of Narcan, and they transport her. So I'm like, all right, so I'm searching the car or whatever, and all of a sudden I pull the ID out, it's the same girl, right? So at that time, that was our first juvenile, she was 17 then, our first juvenile overdose in Janesville. So I go to the hospital, right, and I'm starting to see all these signs and symptoms, you know, looking at a parent who died from a drug overdose. Mom and boyfriend currently using drugs, right? Definitely a drug endangered child, right? Get to the hospital, and I'm talking to her, and she recognizes me, we recognize each other. The scary thing was she was pretty far gone when I first saw her, that I didn't recognize her. But during our conversation, in the ER Mercy, she screams out, I hope you're happy, Dad, up at the ceiling, and I'm like, holy cow, you know, this girl needs something, right? So we get her into, you know, CPS becomes involved, but she's 17, so that relationship is kind of strained. Again, she's been like fighting for herself, taking care of her sisters, had a lot of trauma in her life. CPS is involved, and they do a pretty good job with a really defiant young woman. Fast forward now a couple years, still, well, not to mention mom and boyfriend, the first ones, they had taken off because basically we were on to him. So they, as soon as they got the 2 younger kids back from CPS, they took off the East Coast. The people she was with on this, I'm trying to explain this because it's getting kind of intertwined. I wish I had a little web chart here. But the other female she was with here was actually her deceased father's wife, so her stepmom, essentially, right? So we debriefed her, and this other male with them, he's like, yeah, we took her money that she gets because her dad died, and her mom, her stepmom mom, took us to buy drugs, right? And they were driving the car that she bought with the money that she gets from like Social Security. So all those things, right? So she supplies her with the drugs she overdoses on, we find drugs in the car, all these things, right? The outcome of this is these charges you see here. Stepmom is sentenced, she pleads guilty to neglecting a child, a misdemeanor. She gets 120 days in the county. And then all these other charges here were dismissed, but they're read into the record. So basically, she doesn't get anything for it, but it's on her record, so to speak. So, talking to the juvenile later, she was pretty upset by this, you know? She felt like, and plus she was like, hey, I'm gonna be totally honest about what happened, right? You know, and sort of like make somebody take some responsibility. Well, this was the outcome for her. So she sees all these felonies were dismissed, and basically, not in these exact words, but she said, oh, I guess my life's only worth 120 days in the county. So, there again, I went back to this thing about like, what kind of value are we putting on our youth, right? The good side out of that, though, is this girl is like in college, and she'll reach out every once in a while, and the last time she reached out, she sent me her like report card, basically like her grades from the semester. So she's doing pretty good considering everything that she's been through. So there's another one where we kind of got in there late, and it's been a challenge to really make a difference. Now, I could go on, a lot more cases, but essentially, the sooner we can detect these kids and get them in a place they can thrive, or get their parents back in a good place, the better success we have breaking this cycle. So, what can you do? Well, am I correct in saying, Cammie, that our foster numbers are extremely low? The last time somebody actually told me a number, it's like 12 foster families in Rock County. I don't know if it's up or down from that. It's not a lot though, right? We have a ton of kids. One sticks out to me in particular. We had a 1.5-year-old come out of the house. And after several hours and about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I watched Moana like twice on my computer with her, there was nowhere for her to go. So the human services worker took her back to the county, and they were just gonna sleep there. So we couldn't find a place on a random weeknight for a 1.5-year-old girl to go. So that's one thing that I would say we can do better, right? We can get more foster families. Talking about being like a volunteer in the schools, right? Or like support. Our community has always been very good about support. You guys have probably seen a lot of advertisements for CASA, or Court Appointed Special Advocates. You know, support for kids. That's a good organization. Big Brothers, Big Sisters. A lot of kids out there that like they need that solid adult in their life. But don't think it's just going to be like a honeymoon either, right? Because like we've seen, these kids they've got some trauma, right? And I think that's where sometimes fostering becomes very hard, right? Janesville Mobilizing for Change has been like huge on the like awareness and prevention and resources part. But also I really look, every time I do this, I look to all of you and try to figure out how do we give kids life skills, right? Especially these teenagers. One in particular I can think about, this girl, she was like a 3rd generation drug endangered child. We were trying to like show her how to make macaroni and cheese. And she was like, why is there no cheese in the box? Right, so she had no idea even like how to add like water and butter to make mac and cheese, right? We also took her for a job interview, when she was an adult. And they're like, do you have work experience? And she said, yep, as an escort. So like her social skills, she thought that was totally acceptable, right? So she really needed some help on the life skills side, okay? And again, like, props to her for like just being like, I'm gonna come at you with everything. However, we need to give you some other skills too, right? So I'm always up for whatever, you know, groups or people that can provide those things. Those are gonna be the things that get people over that hump and into a place where they can thrive. So, best way to report one of these is you can call law enforcement. I will tell you though that if you call me and you say, hey, the people next door, they're using a bunch of drugs and they have kids, and you don't want to leave your name, it's really hard for me to act on it because I don't have a reliable named person, right? So I have to sit there and hope that I see something that I can act on. The other side on it though is you can call CPS, and CPS is totally anonymous, and they can go out, we can make initial contact there. And sometimes that works good when I roll up in plain clothes looking like Joe Blow. Actually, I look a lot like a cop, so I'm not the best person to do this. But we have somebody roll up there and like say Cammie and I go up, knock on the door, and we're like, hey, we had this report. We come in and talk to you, and then I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm Officer Stubik, I work at the Street Crimes Unit. Heard maybe you have a problem with addiction, you know, or bring Officer Woodman with me. So we've had a little bit of success that way, breaking down the barrier between law enforcement and people who are stuck in addiction, just by walking the walk, and that's a lot of what Chad's going to talk about. So, and really, sounds corny, but if you see something, say something, because I'd much rather have it be like, no, that was nothing, than be like, boy, I wish you would have said something. So, the goals here again, like I was saying, it's really about breaking that cycle. We don't want to have that like chip off the old block, kid doesn't have a chance, apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And, you know, as I said, earlier the better, but it's never too late to try to like get into these kids' lives. So, all right. Sherry says I'm done. So, that's my information there. I'm going to invite Officer Woodman up, and also Cammie and Beth from CPS. And I'll let them talk a little bit about their stuff, and then we'll take questions from them. So.
Thank you.
Literally, I would talk for 5.
Chad's much better than me about keeping it.
No, the really cool thing is Justin has touched on a lot of what I typically talk about anyways. So my name is Chad Woodman. I've been a police officer with the city of Janesville for about 20 years. 3 years before that with Rock County, so approximately 23 years in law enforcement. Obviously in that 23 years, serving our county, serving our city, obviously I've seen a lot of things. I can tell you that in the last 4 years that I've been doing this, I've seen way more things than I ever thought that I would see. And it's affected me probably more so in a positive than anything. I can say that after, I don't know, 18 years of being in law enforcement, I was a little jaded. I had a little bit of compassion fatigue. It's really hard for us to see who people are that we serve in our community, because we go from call to call to call, we put a Band-Aid on something and we walk away, all right? And usually those calls that we get sent to are negative, right? So it's negative, 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 all right? So with my job, obviously, I'm exposed to some negativity. I'm exposed to people who are stuck in addiction. However, I get to work with them on a one-on-one basis for essentially either as long as they let me or until we're done. And I can truly say that I have a completely new perspective on people. That people who suffer from addictions are people just like everybody else. They have hopes, they have dreams, they have, they have kids that they do care about. The difference is they have this huge issue that they're suffering with at that point. I got so involved in it that I decided to go back to college. So I'm in a master's program for clinical mental health, and as much as I try to kind of stay away from AODA issues, it always draws me back because it truly is kind of a passion of mine. There's some addiction stuff in my family. So, you know, it kind of comes home for me. So, like I said, I started this job, or this position approximately 4 years ago, and I took it over from Officer Foster, who did a great job starting the program up. One of the things that I found that that there was a lack of is really this open communication between law enforcement and other agencies like CPS, like recovery centers, like counseling centers, things that you typically wouldn't see. I mean, you would think that law enforcement has this direct connect with all of those things, but ultimately, what are we typically doing? We're going from call to call to call. Okay, so please don't judge me on my mission statement that I created, but it was, you know, I kind of went back and forth on some things, and a couple key words here. What's the thing here? There we go. Solidifying relationships, and I truly believe in that. We are solidifying or creating relationships, positive relationships between law enforcement and people in our community, where we partner with community treatment resources and hopefully prevent overdose fatalities, and probably most importantly, encourage that lifelong sobriety. And Chief Morris said it, numerous law enforcement agencies throughout the country have said it, we cannot arrest our way out of this addiction crisis. I say addiction crisis. The opioid crisis is what got us here tonight. It got me this position. It got us probably more involved in drug endangered children. However, I will say that our country not only is going through an opioid crisis, we are going through an addiction crisis. All right, there are more people addicted to everything, and I don't have an answer as to why or how this occurred. I'm sure everybody in this room has their opinions on it, and they're probably all right. So yeah, Justin stole my pictures. And I apologize. I should have probably given a disclaimer that some of these pictures may trigger some thoughts, feelings. So this is typically what we see. You know, when Justin and I come into somebody's life, their life does not resemble life anymore. It's a shambles, it's crisis, it's chaos. All right? The only thing that these folks live for from day to day is getting the next fix. I have not encountered one person that says that they like to live like this. Not one. And they all want help. All right? One of the things that, I'll get that off because nobody wants to see that stuff. One of the things that that we created a long time ago was the Drop Liaison program, and that's where we went into the community, we went into our recovery community, and we spoke with members from AA, NA, Smart Recovery, people who have, if they're into hot yoga and that's what got them clean, then, we embrace that. And we took those folks, we said, hey, can you help us? Can you help us with our community that has addiction? And they said, absolutely. So we started this Drop Liaison program. Since then, it has morphed into peer support specialists, recovery coaches. I currently sit on a couple boards right now, one of those being Rock River Recovery. I can't even remember half the names of them. But, so I guess the point of the story is the Janesville Police Department is immersed into recovery efforts. And Justin had said it before, the drug unit traditionally goes after the supply of illegal narcotics into our community. With the drop piece, we also attack the demand portion of it too. All right, and I really do think that two-pronged approach is pretty important. We also added another prong to it, and that's education. So I actually go into the schools, I bring people who are in active recovery, and I allow them to talk to the students there. There's no cameras, there's no video. As much as numerous places have requested that they come in, I don't allow it because it's a place where, you know, our youth can actually ask questions. They can hear the real story on how it happened. And every single time we give presentations, there's a handful of kids that come up and say, I'm there now, I need help, okay? So, you know, and this isn't about me, this is about our community helping other community members battle this addiction crisis. So addiction, once again, I promise I'd take 5 minutes, I'm probably blowing that already. So what's the vulnerability? You know, once again, I'm no expert in this. I don't think there are experts in it. And we have numerous doctors in this country, in this world, that say, well, it could be genetic, it could be ACEs, it could be X, Y, and Z, the effects of a stressful life, I don't know, mental disorders. I believe that all of these things are possible factors that go into addiction. All right, it's just identifying those things and having a strong community that when somebody asks for help, we have the resources to provide to them. And we don't stigmatize their addiction. We say, hey, it's okay, come on, we got some help for you. That's not to say that we enable criminal behavior either. You know, I'm sorry, if you get burglarized, there's a victim there, and there needs to be restitution or some type of process to assist that victim. Okay, well, so resources that I use, I already kind of talked about it. Drop a liaison, peer support specialist. Folks, I can't tell you how much I rely on peer support specialists and recovery coaches. It's just phenomenal. I just today I had a mom or son come in. He has 8 years of addiction, and we got him hooked up with a peer support specialist. I take that back. 2 people I referred to for peer support today. All right, county resources, they are there. And I will say this, Rock County, for where we're at, I would always love to see more resources, you know, but those things cost money, and that's way above my pay grade. But the one thing that I learned a long time ago in this position is if there's a roadblock, I go around it. If there's a wall, I go over it. You know, I'll find resources. We will find ways. It may not be exactly what the person in need wants, but it'll be something, and it's a start. Shelters, yep, there's a few around here. Like anything, I'd like to see more. District Attorney, the DA's office, work hand in hand with them. And then obviously private counseling. So what is the, I mean, I am not a PowerPoint guy. I don't like talking about these things or talking from PowerPoints. But, you know, once again, breaking down stigma and understanding that there's a lot of things needed to understand and do when it comes to recovery. All right? And everybody's individual recovery looks different. So, yeah, and this is kind of what I do. I conduct screening. I was able to retain a very, very, very small grant from Whitewater University to start doing studies with people with addictions, kind of what led them there, where their life is, and then a 3-month and another 6-month study on where they're at after the program. So interviews, referrals, consultations, educational services. You know, one big thing that is always needed is shelter. And once they get stabilization and get back on their feet, another thing is a lot of them want to work. A lot of them want to feel useful in our community. And that's one thing that we try to find for. Success. All right, real quick. Can somebody give me what success in my program would look like? Anybody? Something.
Maintain that sobriety.
Maintain sobriety. Thank you. Awesome. Anybody else got anything?
Basically, just turn their life around.
Turning their life around, absolutely. And those things are that's super high on my list. I have learned in this position, if you win the battles, hopefully you win the wars. So, one thing that I absolutely love that I think came from this position, I want to say that we're doing a lot better, is the fact that we have people who have been in our program that call Justin, they call me, they call other people in street crimes and they say, hey, you know what? I slipped up last week, I need some help. Awesome, you know what? You opened up that line of communication with us, you're there with us again, absolutely, let's find you some help. Or, hey, you know what? I'm doing great. I feel awesome. That's perfect. That's how I want you to be. I want lifelong sobriety. I want people turning their life around. But I will take little bits and chunks when I can. All right, so this is my friend Curtis. Curtis with his wife and his kid. Quick story on Curtis. Curtis came to me. He didn't come to me. He was brought to me. And he was in need. His life was in chaos again. He had found recovery. But he slipped up again. And he told me one time, very early on in our conversations, he's like, hey man, all I want to do is I want to take my kid to Disney World. I'm like, well, that can be done. And so we started these little goal things. I thought I was smart by implementing some things that I learned in my program. He had saved a whole summer, and he sent me this picture one night. And I was like, Justin was there, I'm like, dude, look at it!
They were pretty sick.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome. And I saw that and I see these things as these huge successes. And I was so thankful, and I called him up, I'm like, dude, bro, I'm super happy for you. That's great. And then after a while, I don't hear from Curtis. I don't hear from him a little bit longer. I don't hear from him a little bit longer. And I call Curtis, I'm like, Curtis, man, what's up? I haven't heard from you. Oh, man, yeah, it's, I'm going through a rough time. All right, well, come on in, get some service, get some help. Curtis was one of my fatalities last year. All right? And I hate to tell you guys that story, but that's the world that we're going through right now. But you know what? This little girl will never, ever forget Disney World. Another quick story. So this guitar is one of my first people. This guitar was pawned off because the client had a drug addiction, and just going through all the things that he went through, all the things. He sends mom a picture of the guitar that he got back after he found sobriety, and there's a little bang there, certification paper on the back wall. It's got a little JPD emblem up there, and it was my congratulation letter to him for finding 1 year of sobriety. So, things like, and he's still around. He's good. I'm not going to give you guys another horrible story. But I have to take these successes when I can get them, And I want you to know that I am the advocate in the office. I'm the advocate at the PD. I'm like, hey man, good for you. I know you fell, but get back on it. Let's do it. Let's phone a friend. Let's continue on with those RAP programs. So, does anybody have any questions about my position or the drop program? No?
If there's a member of someone's family and we wanted to call to find out if maybe, do you talk to them?
Absolutely.
Or if I was to report someone, would you in your, however you approach it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you probably already know the person.
Well,
Been around for a while, so.
you may be surprised,
How?
but here's the thing. So I also like to say that I have a great job at the police department because I get to be kind of the nice guy. And when things are going wrong, I call in Justin, I'm like, hey man, take care of it.
Hand the bag.
So, yeah, handle my life like
Yeah.
So, yes, to answer your question, yes. However, I do not like to blindside people.
Yeah.
All right, I appreciate, you telling me who that is, but I also want their family. I kind of want that initial, hey, just so you know, somebody's going to be giving you a call because I think you got an issue. Or, yeah, I've done those cold calls.
No, yeah, knowing this is really good because I could definitely bring it up.
Okay,
It's gonna
perfect.
be kidding out of Rock County pretty soon.
Perfect. And if they're in Rock County right now, I really want to know because Rock County has some grants going on right now that are phenomenal for helping people reacclimate into society. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some super good programs right now. I can't be more happier that that's in my community.
Do you contact anybody in
Yes, I
in
have.
there too?
Yep.
So if I would let her know, give her your number,
Absolutely.
that kind of thing?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
Awesome.
please
Thank
do.
you.
Any other questions? I gotta let Cammie speak. She's probably the most influential person here. So,
And I so apologize. I was like, oh man, I did really bad. So, but and one of the things that I want to mention is Cammie and Beth are coming up. So like Curtis, that was really hard for us because we got really close. And but on the flip side there too, like we have this memory of Disney, but also we have the trauma of losing a parent that we need to get ahead of that, right? And it's kind of a good segue into CPS because obviously when Curtis died, we immediately thought we have to reach out and contact that child, right? Handle with care, all those things. So segue into that, you guys want to explain the process a little bit of what the goal of CPS is and dispel all the boogeyman stories because that's what gets me. So.
Yeah, so I'm Cammie Williams. I am the supervisor in the initial assessment unit. So there's social workers that go out and do the investigations and they report to me and tell me what they're seeing and what they're finding. I did investigations myself for 15 years. Love what I do. And then Beth, you can go and explain your role and then kind of tell me your process.
So my name is Beth Rye. I supervise the access unit in CPS, which is basically the front door to CPS. So my staff and myself review all of the reports that come into our department, and we make a determination at the point of access whether it warrants CPS intervention. So many of the reports we receive go into our filing system, our USACLIS computer system, and CPS never responds to them. The reports we respond to are the reports describing children who have been harmed or maltreated already, or reports describing circumstances which would lead a reasonable person to believe this child is at risk of harm. So a question I'm frequently asked is, does a child have to be hurt for CPS to respond? Does something bad have to happen before you guys are going to do something? No. We can screen in reports and do assessments when circumstances described would lead one to believe this child is at risk of harm. It just hasn't happened yet. And our goal is to screen in those reports and intervene before that child is harmed. So once I screen in the reports, we have 3 initial assessment units. Cammie supervises unit 2. So then my role is done at that point, and I simply hand over the report to Cammie and make a recommendation on when our response time should be. The same day, within 24, 48 hours, or within 5 days are our response times. And then it's up to Cammie and her worker to go out and do the assessment, whether that be with law enforcement, code enforcement, medical counseling. We respond with lots of different services depending on the circumstances, and they decide if CPS has jurisdiction to intervene.
And what percentage of our reports involve drugs? It's very, very high. I want to say 90, I read at the DEP conference. 90% of CPS reports have some sort of drug involvement. Maybe not at the point of access when it's coming into Beth, but when the worker goes out, we ask about drugs, alcohol, all that. About 90% of the time there is an element of that. I liked the comment about what the officer said, like they can't arrest their way out of this epidemic, and we can't take kids away from their parents and get out of this epidemic. I will tell you, when workers go out, the stigma of CPS is we're baby snatchers. We take babies out of the home, or children, we're homewreckers. I think that is a very old stigma that we have had for many years, but we are working very hard about keeping families intact. And I think one of the biggest complaints is a report will come into the access about drugs and it'll get screened in, and then family might be upset now. It's like, they're using drugs, why aren't you taking their kids? You know, one thing we really have to look for within CPS, and Officer Subendick touched on it, is how does the caretaker, the parent, the guardian's drug use impact the child's safety? There's lots of amazing parents that use drugs. It doesn't mean that they need to lose their kids over it. But there's lots of different things that we look for. You're gonna see CPS doing a lot of planning. You're gonna hear the word protective plan from families or people in the community, which is we're not taking kids out of the home anymore. We're finding relatives to take the kids, to refer them to Officer Woodman or to our services in the community to get the treatment. There is a huge trend that I have found in working drug cases is when I have the workers remove the kid and place them into custody, is they fall off the wagon. They go and use more, they have more free time because now they don't have kids to take care of. So the department is big on wrapping services around the family now in the home, which means maybe it's grandma comes into the home with mom or dad, whoever's using drugs, if the home environment is safe and is there to supervise or there to take care of the child. There's lots of factors that play into that, because it's like, why would you expose a kid to a parent who's in the home using drugs? A lot of parents leave the home to use their drugs, and then they come back and they're still able to do some of their cares, but there's that person there to watch them, because these kids love their parents, whether they're using heroin, crack, whatever. They love their parents and they love their home and their bedroom and their toys. So I think the shift for us is really wrapping services around in the home if we can. Sometimes we have to pull them out and put them with grandma or aunt or uncle. We're trying to get away from foster care and using family. We have lots of different systems now, like Intel, that we can use to find second, third, fourth cousins to take these kids. We still need the foster homes, and they're fantastic. But you'll see us doing a lot of more family and services wrapping around and then referring out for the treatment and kind of monitoring that, which is a real shift, I feel like, in our practice. Trying to stay out of the court systems more and work with the family. We just have better outcomes. You know, we don't look like the bad guy. We care. We want to see kids stay in their home environments, because there's the secondary trauma. There's lots of things that go into those decisions when you remove a kid. There's all these other problems they have in their future, and we're trying to avoid that. So I want to be brief, and I know I could go on and on about lots of different things that we do within our department, but is there any questions about CPS and our role and how we're kind of working with DEC or with the DEC kids? I went fast, I'm sorry. And I talked fast. Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions before we end for the evening?
I do have one.
Okay.
And so I own a couple daycares in Rock County, and I love the fact that kids are given to family members, and I really do. I see why that could be very helpful. I guess one thing I struggle with, and I'm sure nobody's going to have necessarily an answer for me, is why is it that, and if anybody here has abused their child or had drugs and given them back, please don't take this as, I'm just wondering, why is it that people who abuse animals can never own a pet again, but people that abuse kids get to try over and over and over? We see it every day in our daycare, and we see them going back to those families, and then we hear about them on the news again. And it is heartbreaking for us. And then when we call CPS, and I love CPS, so please don't take it this way, not at all. But when we call CPS, the families do find out that it was us. And then when the families get these kids back, they take their kids out of our daycares, which was another traumatic thing for them because they felt safe in our daycares. So it's just so, it's hard to want them to ever go back to those families. I don't know. And that's one thing we struggle really a lot with is we promise these kids we're going to keep them safe. We promise them that they're loved, and yet they're handed right back to these families that initially are going to kill them. Or, God forbid, worse, that they have to live in this the rest of their lives. And it's we don't know what to do anymore. We as a daycare, we don't know what to do. And we've seen some of the roughest things in Rock County. And do you have any ideas of what we can do?
You know where I go with that? That's what this is all about. You know, everything you're probably thinking of has been like the way we've historically done things, right? We always say, boy, the kid doesn't have a chance. You know, that's kind of like the way that I recall people protecting themselves, right? Because we get invested in kids because we want to see and we care about them. So our way to like minimize the trauma on us, because you guys are experiencing trauma too. Like if you have people in your life that are using drugs and you're trying to help them, you're experiencing trauma as well, right? And like Officer Woodman said, we have like an addiction problem in this country. Not everyone, right? We're not going to be able to solve every case. But now this multidisciplinary approach, like when we go into that home, when CPS, when we say, hey, this environment isn't safe, your children are going to be removed, here's how you're going to get them back so they don't fall off the bandwagon, so they don't retaliate. You know, like the physical abuse stuff, that's a little bit different, right? So on the drug side though, I can't tell you how many times like Cammie or a worker, I and Officer Woodman have all been in the same place at once, and we're like, here's what you have, okay? Call all these resources before you call that dealer. And like, no joke, when I say Chad's phone is on, it's probably not on 24/7 like it used to be, but it's on a lot, okay? And my phone is always on for these folks too. About the whole like reporting and then finding out you, well, I'll tell you, people aren't stupid
No,
either.
and that's, I don't even
So
care about
they,
that.
you know what I mean? Like, they're
yeah.
not, CPS isn't like,
no.
hey, Susie told
Oh,
me
no,
that.
I know you guys don't, but they're gonna know.
They're also smart
Right,
too.
right.
However, you know,
Right.
like, you're doing the right thing, I would tell you, because you're standing up for that kid.
Oh, absolutely, we
But
would
what do you
never
tell-
change
what do
it,
you
but
tell
it's
a
just,
4-year-old
it's hard to.
who you know is going back to the abusive home? And it's a severe abusive home.
Yeah.
And he's crying, I don't wanna go back, don't let me, don't let them.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, I totally
Is there a lot of
empathize.
follow-up? Just, I mean,
Yeah.
like, on families, there is a lot of follow-up, like, to make
Yeah.
sure that, okay.
Yeah. And actually, you know, we can talk a little bit
Okay.
after this too, because it's very, I think we're very specific, and we'll figure something out. We can work together, I feel like. Like
Yeah,
Sherry
when you
said.
talk about trauma, and when you talk about taking children away from their family, when you look at the long-term implications of that, it's bad. And you think that they're in foster care, they're safe, but then they grow out of foster care, and then
And
they
wonder why
have,
their parents weren't.
and then they have no
Yeah.
family
I
as
do
a young
understand that.
adult to go back to for Christmas, for example. And so it's really important to help them keep contact and keep a relationship with their actual family.
But Wendy,
And-
where's the line of saying, this is
And that's where,
definitely
and if there's something
unhealthy?
else wrong, I mean, just keep calling CPS, because they keep a file, like she said, we put that in our file. And so the more reports and more reports and more reports that they have, the bigger that file gets, and the more they have to back them up if they do decide to pull them out of the home again. So, but their goal is to keep them together, so they're gonna try everything in their power to keep them together. But if they're truly
Right.
in danger, then I hope the system is working to get them out of that situation.
Sure.
So, and I'm sure there's cases where it's not always working perfectly, so. And that's gotta be hard to have to see that child begging you not to make them go home with that parent. Does anyone have any other questions?
I just like to
Yes.
make a comment. We're actually recording this for JM4C. And I realize there's some personal comments here, so we will respect those and trim them out of the video, just so,
Sure.
you know, because I know there are a couple of people that have said some
Just
things.
me blabbing away.
Because we're already not gonna include the video of the child that
Right.
was, you know,
Right.
experiencing.
Right, so there'll be some things edited out.
Because we want this to be an
Made for
educational
TV
piece for
version.
everybody.
And really, you know, if you guys think of things after you leave here, you guys are always welcome to call. And again, if it's a thing where like you're saying you want us to reach out, we're gonna respect your, you know, your stance on it too. So if you're just looking for information, we're here to provide information. If you're looking for us to take a little more forward approach, we're there too. You guys can probably tell I can talk on this for a while. I'm really passionate about it, and any help you guys can offer, that's awesome too. We're all in this to help solve the problem, so whichever way that might be.
Well, thank you all for coming and hanging around a little longer than we planned, but hopefully it was worth your time, so.
Great.
We appreciate your time.